There are movies so controversial they can offend an entire country. But what happens when that country has nuclear weapons and declares war on Hollywood? We're not exaggerating. This really happened, and the movie responsible was The Interview. No one could have imagined that a satire about a dictator would trigger an international conflict, and a cyberattack on one of the most powerful film studios in the world. An unprecedented event that hurt the movie, caused millions in losses, led to mass layoffs, froze the entertainment industry, and made the United States believe it was facing a new 11. You might be wondering how a single movie could cause a global crisis like this. To understand it, we first need to look at its creator, Seth Rogen. He came out of what became known as the New American Comedy, a movement that dominated Hollywood in the early 2000s. As part of a standout group of actors and filmmakers, Rogen made a name for himself by fully leaning into a style of humor built around anti-heroes, crude jokes, and clever dialogue. He starred in, wrote, and produced movies for other directors, usually alongside his partner and childhood friend, Evan Goldberg. Their success eventually led them to make their directing debut with This Is the End, a comedy centered on the apocalypse. By the early 2000s, Rogen was already famous and widely liked, respected by his peers. But that wasn't enough for him. He was ready to push further. He no longer wanted to joke about awkward adults, unexpected pregnancies, or even the end of the world. This time, he wanted to aim higher. That's why he returned to a bold idea, one that could place him at the top of modern comedy in all of Hollywood, while ultimately putting the heart of the film industry and the entire United States at risk. In the late 2000s, Seth Rogen and his friend Evan Goldberg took a short break from the pre-production of This Is the End. They decided to relax by joking around with serious ideas and situations. That's when Rogen pitched this concept. A journalist manages to get an interview with the most unreachable dictator in the world and suddenly has the chance to take him out. They stared at each other in shock. They didn't need to say anything to know they had just found pure gold. Rogen thought back to comedies that had mocked political figures before, like The Great Dictator, written, directed, and starring Charlie Chaplin. He felt he could follow a similar path. Even so, he believed that with Goldberg, they could push things even further, taking the bold, over-the-top humor they were already known for to the next level. Before they lost the spark, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg wrote a treatment, but they were so busy that they couldn't focus on the full script. So they handed the job to Dan Sterling, who had written and produced comedy series like The Office. Within a few weeks, he had the first draft of The Interview ready. The story follows Dave Skylark, the host of Skylark Tonight, his own Hollywood celebrity talk show. The show reaches its 100th episode, and everything feels like a celebration, except for his producer, Aaron Rappaport. Frustrated with not being taken seriously, he convinces Dave to aim for a very different kind of guest. That's when they realize that Kim Jong-il, the leader of North Korea, is a fan of Skylark Tonight. It's important to note that North Korea is one of the few countries with a communist government and is known for its military programs, heavy censorship, and repeated reports of human rights abuses. And yes, it's considered an enemy of the United States. Back to the script. Rappaport manages to set up the interview, but they have to travel to Kim's palace in Pyongyang. The duo is excited to prove they're more than just shallow entertainers, until the CIA asks them to quietly eliminate the North Korean leader. Otherwise, he threatens a major attack against the U.S. West Coast. Their attempts to carry out the mission quickly turn into a series of gags and misunderstandings. Rogen liked the script, and Goldberg was happy with it as well. However, any attempt to move the project forward stopped in December 2011, when the real Kim Jong-il passed away. The story was suddenly outdated, so they chose to wait for his successor. Just days later, power was taken over by his son, Kim Jong-un. To stay aligned with real events, Rogen rewrote the script with North Korea's history and the new leader in mind. While finishing the material, he noticed that the new Kim welcomed former basketball star Dennis Rodman. Seeing a North Korean leader known for a tightly controlled public image openly embrace an American sports celebrity was something unheard of. That moment convinced the comedian that the story he had imagined wasn't as unrealistic as it seemed. Once the script was complete, Rogen had to find a studio willing to take a chance on a comedy bolder than anything he had done before. Luckily for the comedian and Goldberg, they had a strong working relationship with Sony Pictures. Since Superbad, they had earned the trust and respect of the studio's leadership, especially Amy Pascal, the co-chair and head of the film division. At the time, she was considered one of the most powerful and intimidating figures in Hollywood. Even with that level of trust, Rogen presented the script for The Interview cautiously. This wasn't a comedy about immature adults like his earlier projects. The story directly involved a real political figure. Against all expectations, Pascal found the idea funny and approved it right away. With a budget of $44 million, The only concern was avoiding details that could cause legal problems. For instance, they couldn't mention the North Korean photographer who, 65 years earlier, had taken a photo of Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of Kim Jong-un. That could have triggered legal action. Because of this, some images would need to be changed during post-production. After casting the actors and putting together the crew, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg filmed the interview between October and December of 2013. The idea of working in North Korean territory was never even considered. Instead, production was set up in Vancouver, Canada, where everyone could work without issues. Along with being co-writer and co-director, Rogen chose to play the role of Aaron himself, giving him space to fully lean into his humor. His excitement for the project was overwhelming and contagious. He could also sense the satisfaction of Amy Pascal and her team at Sony Pictures. They knew they had a dangerous movie on their hands, but Rogen believed the exaggerated, absurd tone would protect them from serious trouble with North Korea. He couldn't have been more wrong. Once post-production on the interview was finished, Sony Pictures organized a test screening. Rogen was anxious. Could his first political satire actually work? To his relief, the audience laughed, especially during the scene where Dave has fun with Kim around military vehicles, which would later become one of the movie's most iconic moments. Still, by the end of the screening, several people said the topic felt too sensitive for a comedy. Above all, they complained that the ending went too far. As a result, Amy asked for changes to be made in a new cut. Rogen understood, but he also knew the movie had hit its mark. It might inspire love or hate, but no one would be indifferent. While Rogen and Evan Goldberg were putting the final touches on the interview, Sony released a trailer in June 2014. The studio planned to release the movie on October 3rd of that same year. When the comedian looked at the early reactions to the trailer, the number of views and positive comments quickly overwhelmed YouTube. Judging by the response, his fans were already expecting the definitive political satire. Rogen told Goldberg they could start chilling the champagne until they received a call from Sony Pictures headquarters. A studio representative told them that a spokesperson from Ministry of Foreign Affairs of North Korea had released an official statement about the interview, calling it an act of aggression and a hostile act. Rogen assumed it had to be a joke worthy of his own humor, like a deleted line from the movie, but no one was laughing. The studio rep explained that the North Korean government had warned of severe retaliation if the movie was released. Rogen still had trouble believing it until the story began appearing in major news outlets around the world. A month later, he read that Ja Song-nam, North Korea's ambassador, had gone before the United Nations to condemn the movie, arguing that its plot, centered on a threat against Kim, openly encouraged violence. Days later, the Korean Central News Agency called on the President of the United States at the time, Barack Obama, to pull the film. The unexpected and bizarre reaction to the interview's trailer could have rattled Rogen. Instead, he welcomed the controversy. Now everyone was talking about the satire he believed would push his career to a new level. Still, he noticed that Goldberg couldn't hide his concern. He also spoke with writer Dan Sterling, who couldn't believe a dictator was aware of his work and worried it could lead to a real-world crisis. But no opinion mattered more than Sony's. Rogen was called in for a meeting with Pascal, convinced she was about to tell him the movie's release had been canceled. Instead, she assured him they would only push it back, moving the release from October to December 25th. She also asked him to go back to the editing room and remove any details that might offend the North Korean government. The comedian agreed, even though he had no clear idea what to cut. Almost anything could be taken as offensive. To make things worse, the tension kept rising. On November 21st, Rogen learned that Sony Pictures had received an anonymous email with a blunt message: "We want financial compensation. Pay for the damage, or there will be consequences." He told himself it was just empty words, that no one would seriously go after a Hollywood studio, that the North Korean government had bigger issues to deal with, until the threats started to feel very real. On November 24, 2014, Rogen arrived at Sony Pictures for another day in the editing room when he noticed employees looked tense and shaken. Goldberg quickly approached him and led him to the nearest computer. The screen was taken over by the image of a smiling skull, along with a message that read, "Hacked by GOP. Warning, we warned you, and this is only the beginning. We have obtained all of your internal data, including confidential and high-level secrets." A nearby employee told them the same message was appearing on every computer in the building. The studio was facing a massive cyber breach. Pascal and other Sony executives brought in IT experts, but they couldn't stop what was happening. The attackers had installed malicious software designed to regain access repeatedly, steal information, and erase traces of the breach. As a result, the studio's entire network was shut down, and an enormous amount of private data began leaking. Executive emails, employees' personal information, and even several movies that hadn't been released yet. If you're curious, you can still find all of those leaked emails online. Some of the most talked about ones include Sony employees begging the studio to stop making movies with Adam Sandler. You can also find Kevin Feige's notes on Amazing Spider-Man 2, or a surprisingly sweet email from Rooney Mara asking Sony if they had any plans to make a sequel to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, only to be ignored by the studio from that point on. And while all of this was happening, Rogan eventually became aware of the information being leaked as well. One email stood out to him in particular, an internal evaluation of the interview written by an executive who described it as desperately unfunny. But that was insignificant compared to the most serious information that was exposed. Highly sensitive data from thousands of current and former employees was leaked, including salaries, identification numbers, and private family information. The flood of Sony leaks damaged countless people and projects, but the name that came up most often was Amy Pascal. Early on, attention focused on emails between her and producer Scott Rudin, where they described Angelina Jolie as spoiled and barely talented. It was also revealed that Pascal earned around $3 million a year, making her the only woman at the company bringing in that amount. And there was more. In some emails, she made comments suggesting that Barack Obama mainly watched movies led by black actors. The cyberattack sent shockwaves through every corner of Hollywood and across the Western world. Responsibility was claimed by a group calling itself Guardians of Peace, hence the initials GOP. Still, much of the media pointed to North Korea. Most theories suggested the government had followed through on its earlier warnings after the release of the interview's trailer. A North Korean spokesperson denied any involvement, but the FBI launched an urgent investigation to identify those responsible. And as if all of that weren't enough, on December 16th, the Guardians of Peace issued an even more extreme warning. They hinted at real-world actions against theaters planning to show the interview. That's when memories of the events of September 2001 resurfaced. Caught in the middle of that tense atmosphere was Seth Rogen. He didn't regret making the interview, but he was furious about everything that had been unleashed. In those anxious hours, countless thoughts ran through his head, yet a few questions kept coming back. What would happen to the movie? Would it still be released in the face of such a chilling warning? The answers came on December 17th, when Rogen and Goldberg were called in by Amy Pascal. She explained that, because of the warnings that had been circulating, no theater was willing to take the risk of showing the interview. For that reason, she decided to cancel the release. Rogen was devastated. His most ambitious project had run into a reality he couldn't get past. Disheartened without a movie, and with the country going through tense days, he followed the news from home. That's how he learned, on December 19th, that the FBI had concluded the cyberattack was organized by the government of North Korea. What surprised him even more was that the issue reached the White House. In a public statement, Barack Obama condemned the hacking and criticized Sony for canceling the release of the interview, arguing that it meant giving in to pressure and setting a dangerous precedent for freedom of expression. While he was still processing the fact that the US president himself had just defended his movie, Rogen got a call from Evan Goldberg. Excited, he told him that Sony Pictures had decided to release the interview on December 25th, as planned, but using a different approach. It would open in a limited number of theaters outside the major chains. At the same time, the studio would release it on digital rental and streaming platforms, like Google Play. For the first time in days, the comedian could finally smile. The movie made $11 million, and let's remember it had cost $44 million. It performed better in its digital release. As for reviews, they were all over the place. But none of that mattered to Rogen. After feeling like he had triggered a global crisis, his precious The Interview had finally been released, and when days passed with no further retaliation or warnings, he celebrated by mocking the hackers. But can we really say The Interview had a happy ending? Not exactly. The cyberattack on Sony Pictures exposed too many internal issues and caused losses of around $200 million. There were mass layoffs, including top executives. Amy Pascal was forced to issue public apologies to the industry and, above all, to Barack Obama. Even so, she had to step down as studio head. Once seen as the most feared woman in Hollywood, Pascal lost credibility and respect because of the leaks. Still, she didn't leave the company entirely and was moved into another role, where she continued producing movies. Sony's crisis served as a warning to the rest of Hollywood. Today, studios invest far more in cybersecurity and train employees on phishing, secure passwords, and other protocols. The changes also reach the creative side. Executives now think twice about content that could offend another country, especially one considered an enemy of the United States. At the same time, they realize the importance of digital distribution models, which would later become essential during the pandemic. Meanwhile, alternative theories appeared, suggesting the cyber attack wasn't carried out by North Korea, but by former Sony employees upset over past layoffs during a company restructuring. The FBI denied that theory, but the doubt remained. To this day, it has never been confirmed who was truly behind Guardians of Peace. As for Seth Rogen, the mind behind the story, he never lost his audience. In fact, he earned praise from major figures in Hollywood for his bold move. Still, the experience left a mark on him for years. He and Evan Goldberg chose to step away from movies and focus on television and streaming projects, where they found more freedom and a bit of calm. Rogen kept starring in comedies like Long Shot, also written by Dan Sterling. He also stood out in films like The Fabelmans, directed by Steven Spielberg. Even so, he never forgot The Interview, which came to be seen as Hollywood's last major politically incorrect comedy. Today, he's surprised that the movie airs without any issues at any hour, as if it had never been at the center of a political conflict. And in case you're wondering, North Korea hasn't taken offense at another movie since, at least not yet. The Interview was designed to be the boldest comedy of its time, but it sparked an unthinkable geopolitical crisis and changed Hollywood in every way. It also shows how the dreams of a creative mind can turn into a nightmare because of forces beyond their control. And above all, it reminds us that art and entertainment can be targeted, but never truly destroyed. For decades, anime has captivated audiences around the world, and Dragon Ball stands as one of its most influential examples.